This is what happens when you ask an astrophysicist the best way to brew coffee. It's called the Next Level Pulsar. And it's not a perfect coffee brewer. It is, however, very cool. And in this video, we're going to, of course, brew coffee with it, see if it makes our cups any better. We're gonna look at the pros, the cons, how it compares to other pour-over drippers, and ultimately we're gonna try and decide who is this thing for. The Pulsar was designed by Next Level Brewing Co. in collaboration with a Canadian astrophysicist by the name of Jonathan Gagné, who is, in addition to being an astrophysicist, a pretty intense coffee geek. The Pulsars are made in the US, and any of the clear parts are made of a Triton plastic, and any of the black parts are made with a food-safe TPE plastic. It looks a little weird, but you basically put a filter in this base here, then dump your coffee in here, put the shower screen on, and start pouring water in. And the secret weapon is right here on the side here, this little valve that you can open up to varying degrees. Now, there's a couple big pour-over brewing problems that the Pulsar tries to solve, and the first one is called bypass. The Pulsar is what's called a no bypass coffee brewer, which means that you're forcing all of the water through the coffee bed itself on its way out of the brewer. Other brewers like a Hario V60, the water can actually escape out through the sides, through the filter, and go around the majority of the coffee grounds. It can make for like a less even brew and lower extractions in some cases. The design of this really eliminates that problem entirely. And another thing that it aims to solve is inconsistency of pouring when you're using a kettle. When you're doing a pour over, you can really mess up a lot of things by the way you're pouring and doing that inconsistently. This little shower screen at the top makes for a perfectly even shower of water on the coffee. It really minimizes a lot of those issues. And the third thing is controlling flow rate. And that is what this little valve down here is for. And using it, you can either stop the flow entirely, do a full immersion brew like a French press if you want, you can open it all the way, or do somewhere in between. Now, all this stuff Jonathan goes into in very great detail, actually, how these variables affect brews in his book, The Physics of Filter Coffee. Very good read if you're really into geeking out about this stuff. Now, if we want to brew like an astrophysicist, we should probably use the recipe that he designed for this brewer, which is actually what I do most of the time. So I've got 20 grams of coffee here, and I'm going to grind it up, and we're going to use a 1:17 ratio. So that's 20 grams of coffee grounds to 340 milliliters of water. Now, I've used a moderately coarse grind setting there, and I've cranked my kettle up just under a boil. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually take the top off here like this. I have the valve closed, and I'm going to put some water in the base here, and I'm just gonna drop my filter right on top of it. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to open the valve and let the water out until the filter comes down to rest on top of those filter ridges there. And that's going to eliminate any air bubbles under there that could mess with the flow. I'm going to put the chamber on. I'm going to pop it on my carafe, dump the coffee in, going to shimmy it out just a little bit, and then I'm going to put this dispersion screen on the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my timer, and I'm going to pour 60 grams of water. That's a 1:3 ratio for my bloom. And when I've done that, I'm just gonna open the valve a little bit until I get a little bit of water coming out, and then I'm gonna close it again. And I'm gonna leave it for about 30 seconds. Sometimes I give it a little swirl, just very gently. Then at the end of 30 seconds, I'm gonna open that valve and I'm gonna start pouring again. Just pour right in the center, and that's gonna make for a very even flow, kind of like a rain of water coming down on there. And I'm gonna bring the water level up until it's just in around about a centimeter above the coffee bed. And what I'm gonna do is, I'm not gonna measure out any pours, I'm just gonna keep topping that up so that the water level stays at about that amount, little bit at a time. Now, if I get the sense that it's flowing too slow, I can open up that valve a little bit. And if I get the sense that it's flowing too quickly, I can close that valve a little bit. and I want to shoot for a total brew time of about 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So that takes a little bit to get used to the feel and watching the flow, seeing what's happening. If you use a really complicated scale setup, you can measure all that stuff more accurately, but most of the time I just like to eyeball it, and you do get the feel for it eventually. And you just want to keep watching that water level, keep it at about the 1 centimeter mark above that coffee bed until you get to the total brew weight of 340 ml. Again, just making little adjustments there. Now, one thing that you'll notice is I have little drips coming off of the valve here, and this is one of probably the main things that the Next Level Pulsar has kind of had as a critique against it, is it can leak out of that valve a little bit. Now, I've left it, but you can fix it by applying, food safe silicone in there. The Next Level team is generally pretty happy to mail out secondary valves and that type of thing as well, but that is a bit of an annoyance that people have had with this thing. All right, and around the 3.5 minute mark, it should be basically finished. I'll close the valve. You can just kind of set it down wherever because it's not going to leak after that. I always suggest giving your pour over a little stir after you brew it, and let's see how this tastes. This is a blend actually between Wilder Lasso and Wilton Benitez. It's a Java and Gesha blend. So good, high extraction, excellent body in the cup, very balanced, very nuanced flavor profile, very good. Now to clean up, all you do is you kind of get any little water that's remaining in the dispersion screen out of there. You can pop this thing off, you go and knock out your base, and then you rinse everything off. Now, before we get to the stuff that I really like and the stuff that I don't actually like about using the Pulsar, I'm going to give you a couple tips for tweaking your brew a little bit. If you want that hyper clear, like tea-like clarity out of your brews, I'm actually going to recommend you stay on the coarser end with your grind. In my experience, the finer I go, it tends to bring out the sweetness a lot more and mute some of that acidity. The flip side of that is it's going to flow a little bit faster, so you need to modulate the flow with that valve. Now, if you actually want to go the other way and get more of more sweetness in the brew, kind of round out that acidity a little more, in addition to going a little bit finer on your grind, you can also lengthen your bloom a little bit, and that can kind of pull the flavor that way a little. There are a lot of other recipes that you can try on the website too, but mostly I stick to the one that Jonathan uses and kind of adapt that. And really, if I just need to modulate the flow a little bit to get it to time out properly around the 3.5 minute mark, I just use the valve on there, and the results are almost always fantastic. Now, some things that I really love about the Pulsar, and the first one is definitely that valve. I can't tell you the number of times that a brew has been flowing too quickly, or I mistimed things the way that I was pouring, and I was able to save it with adjusting that valve. I do find that the best way to use it is to go by feel. So, that can make for maybe not super repeatable results, but once you get into that flow of doing it, you can get really good results. Another thing that I really like is the actual cup profile and consistency. I like the big presence, nuanced, but not hyper acidity forward. It is a very well-rounded profile that you get out of this, almost universally flattering depending on what you're looking for in your cup of coffee. I really enjoy the cups, and I like how consistent they are and high extraction typically they are. Now, things that I actually don't like about the Pulsar, and there are a few of them. The first is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is definitely worth your consideration. The Pulsar is a brewer that really demands your focus. Because there's so many different ways to use it, you almost need to even approach finding the type of recipe that you like the best with that scientific, methodical approach. And then once you're actually using it, there's a lot of pieces, there's an order to remembering how to do things. You can adjust so many ways that you're brewing with it that it can actually get a little bit overwhelming unless you're able to give it your 100% focus. Also, it excels at larger doses. And this is something for people who like to do smaller dose coffees, 15 grams somewhere in there or less in some cases even. Some people say you can't do them on this. That's not true in my experience. I find, if I modulate using that valve, I can very easily do lower dose coffees. However, I will say everything just seems to cooperate a little bit better right in around that 20 gram dose mark. And depending on what you're looking for, that might be too big of a cup cup of coffee for you, or it might be perfect. And as much as I do like the valve, it is probably my favorite part of the brewer. It also, you know, when it starts to leak, it is a little bit maddening. And owners of the Pulsar seem to very commonly take issue with this. Not every user reports it. I have experienced it, and so have others. And another consideration is cost. You know, it costs $60, so it's not a cheap brewer. And also the filters, you know, it's $9 for 100 filters, so it's not exorbitant, but it is more expensive than like AeroPress and their proprietary size. So you got to get them from the Pulsar crew. Now, as far as competitors go, you'll very often see the Pulsar discussed along brewers like the AeroPress, the Hario Switch, the S-Works Design bottomless dripper, and now I'm sure the Oria Z1 as well. All what you would call like hybrid brewers or zero bypass brewers. And none of them can exactly do totally what the Pulsar does. The Hario Switch is either like wide open or fully sealed. The AeroPress uses a bit of a different mechanic in how it brews. The S-Works Design dripper is pretty close with a couple differences. You can use wave filters in the S-Works dripper, which can introduce some bypass depending on how you're setting up that dripper. It does work very well with smaller doses though. And the Oria Z1, I will be covering that dripper on the channel shortly too. So you have a dripper that makes really great cups of coffee with some quirks. So that's pretty par for the course for these things, to be honest. Now the question is, who is it for? Or I guess, is this the dripper for you? And I will say you have to be a certain type of person to enjoy using the Pulsar on a daily basis. You know, you don't have to be an astrophysicist for sure. I find it really helps if you can approach your brewing with that methodical, focused mindset, just because there are so many different ways to use it and so many ways that you can tweak how you're brewing that can have a pretty dramatic impact in the result of your cup. It just works the best if you enjoy that kind of thing. Now, if you just want easy, simple, no fuss pour over coffee, there are drippers that can get you to a good result with a lot less fuss, that's for sure. But the cups out of this thing, high extraction, very nuanced, very tasty, and very consistent too. Delicious, delicious brews. Very good coffee, not for everybody. But I want to know, what do you think of this pour over dripper? Would you consider a brewer that is as involved of a process as this one? Or maybe you're an owner and you use it in a slightly different way. I would love to hear from you down there in the comments as well. Do you like that flexibility where you can just tweak every variable until you have the perfect cup of coffee for you? Whatever you think, I would love to hear your thoughts down there in the comments. I'll leave a video here of another fun and unusual no bypass brewer that you can check out. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.